facing federal charges in connection to the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol over the 2020 election results. Joining us now is Praveen Fernandes, Vice President at the Constitutional Accountability Center. Praveen, thanks so much for being here with us. Again, this is historic. This is now the third indictment of Trump, which is the only former president to face federal charges. What do people need to know about his arraignment today?
The arraignment really is a pretty ordinary step in the criminal justice process, where someone makes an appearance before a judge. The charges are read to them. These are the charges, of course, that were in the indictment that many of the public have already seen, because there are obviously those 4 counts. But it's the formal moment when the charges are read to the defendant, and Donald Trump then enters a plea. Then there are also other portions of it that ordinary defendants not normally sort of experience, which is mugshots and fingerprinting, et cetera. Those are the things that Donald Trump is not expected to go through. But again, the charges will be read to him, the 4 charges that are in the indictment, and then he will enter a plea, guilty or not guilty.
Yeah, let's go through those 4 federal charges. They are conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. Can you help us understand in simpler terms the significance of these charges and which, if any of them, stands out most to you?
Well, I mean, I think they all stand out for their gravity. The first 2 charges that you mentioned, you mentioned really 4 charges, but we can probably lump 2 of them together. The conspiracy to defraud the United States, if you read the indictment, sort of is about the many schemes after Donald Trump learned that he did not, in fact, win the election. The many schemes that are alleged in the indictment to sort of overturn the election results, whether those involved false electoral certificates, pressuring local officials, pressuring his own vice president. Those are the kinds of things that were described in the indictment. The second one is conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding or obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. Those were the second and third counts that you mentioned. And those are really about the obstruction of the proceeding on January 6th, where Congress normally convenes in a joint session to count the votes. And here we're talking about obstruction that involves everything from pressuring the vice president to, in fact, not accept those certificates, or in fact to delay the proceeding. And there are a variety of things in the indictment that talk about ways in which the official results that have been sent through those electoral certificates were going to try to be pressured to sort of not be accepted. And then the last one is conspiracy against rights. And here we're talking about the right to vote and the right to have that vote be counted. And this is a statutory provision that members of the American public might not be that familiar with, but it dates back to the Reconstruction era, which is right after the Civil War. It's a statute that was passed in the wake of huge attempts to prevent newly freed African Americans who had just been released from the bondages of slavery. And there were lots of attempts to prevent them from voting or to prevent for their votes from being counted. So the statute was passed. But what people might not realize is for 150 years since then, the Department of Justice, under both Republican and Democratic administrations, has used this statute to protect voting rights.
Sure. Thank you for explaining all of that. Now, on the flip side of this, Trump's attorneys have described the indictment as an attack on his free speech. How do you think that plays a role in this?
I think if you look at the indictment, I've heard those arguments, and it's hard to see how the free speech rights are implicated. These are about actions that are alleged that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators, the unindicted co-conspirators that were listed in this indictment, these are about actions they took, not about free speech rights that they exercised. In fact, the indictment's very clear, and if you read the first 2 pages, about a variety of different things that Donald Trump did in terms of expressions of disapproval about the election results, all of which would have been protected. And so I think the indictment was sort of smart in the way it was crafted, because it anticipates those free speech arguments and says, here are a bunch of things that Donald Trump did that cast aspersions on the election or ways in which he challenged the election in court, and all of those would have been protected, and that yet here are the criminal actions that we're alleging that are not protected. And so I don't think that Donald Trump's lawyers are going to find much success peddling those free speech claims in court.
Yeah, and Praveen, you mentioned earlier some of the things that are typically standard with the mugshot and fingerprinting, things that aren't necessarily expected today. Trump also had the option to appear for his arraignment via video. Didn't have to be there in person, although we know that he has arrived there at the courthouse in person. Why do you think that is?
I don't want to speculate why he might have decided to avail himself of one versus the other. I'm not sure. I did read the same thing that you did, which is that the option was provided and that he didn't avail himself of that.
Sure. Okay, well, the indictment, which was brought by special counsel Jack Smith, alleges a scheme orchestrated by Trump and also 6 unnamed, unindicted co-conspirators designed to overturn the election results. What do we know about those 6 individuals, and could they face charges?
I think that there's been a lot of media speculation and sort of very thoughtful accounts of who those unindicted conspirators likely are. But what we know, obviously, is for a conspiracy, it has to be a number of individuals acting in concert. So obviously, you can't have a conspiracy made of one person. So these unindicted co-conspirators and the allegations that are sort of pled with great detail within this indictment are critical to understanding the charges. They might be charged at a later point. So it was important for them to be described in this document, but not named. But they might face charges later. So they're unindicted co-conspirators for the moment. But DOJ might make a decision down the line to indict them.
Yeah, and a lot of the questions surrounding all of the legal issues that Trump has been facing is how could this impact his 2024 presidential run, especially when you consider that he also could be facing potentially more charges in the near future in Georgia, where a district attorney there is investigating alleged efforts by him and his allies to overturn the 2020 losses in the state.
I think there's obviously the physical challenge of having to answer charges in multiple jurisdictions. You mentioned a bunch of, trials that will be ongoing. We know that there is currently a trial scheduled in New York around the New York charges in March. We know there's the Espionage Act charges, which have to do with the classified documents, that is scheduled to start in Florida in May. So, there's obviously the physical challenge of being in these various different places to defend against that. There are also January charges, not criminal, but civil, in the E. Jean Carroll defamation trial that are expected sort of to be scheduled in January. So, I do think it's going to be a busy time for Donald Trump and his legal team.
Yeah. Praveen, any other final thoughts here that you might have?
No, I think it's a moment that is incredibly grave for the nation. These are grave charges, and we hope that the justice system reacts with the gravity that this requires, which means that there should be a trial. It should be speedy, and the trial should be governed by the facts and the law, and should follow wherever the facts and the law lead.
All right. Well, Praveen Fernandes, thank you so much for joining us here to break it all down. We appreciate it here at Live Now from Fox.